Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome back, everybody. And now some of the exciting bits where we get to hear directly from a panel of youth with heaps of expertise and awesomeness to share with us. I'm not going to say very much now, except to just introduce you to my friend and compatriot, Rose Hiha-Agnew, who runs the National Community Action Plan for Community Governance. And she's got extensive experience in management and governance across iwi community and governance organisations, and has led local and central government projects from environmental to Te Ao Māori, sustainability and infrastructure, large-scale transformational programs. So we're pretty lucky to have you here today, Rose. And Rose will be leading our panel discussion with our panelists. Over to you, Rose. Thank you very much.
Tēnā koe, Michelle. Thank you for having me here with everyone today. Such a fantastic opportunity to share the value of our volunteers, and in particular for community governance, all of the volunteers who sit out on our not-for-profit. So ko Rose Hiha Tukuinga. I'm the Director for Community Governance New Zealand. And today we've got a great panel. We have, who do we have with us today? We've got Michelle, Donald and Dante. They're going to come up on screen and join us. And we're going to be talking about youth participation in governance in the volunteering space. So our discussion for this session is going to be what are we seeing and what is working well. I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves to you. So just maybe where they're from, their organisation, and then we'll come back to some questions that I'll be asking them each. So I think, Michelle, I might start with you because you've come up first on my screen. So kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko ohirangi te munga, ko waitamata te moana, no haina o kutipuna, no tamaki makaurau aho, ko Huang tuku whanau, ko Michelle tuku. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm a 1.5 generation Chinese New Zealander, raised and based in Tamaki Makaurau up in Auckland. So mahi aho I kainga ora me Multi-Ethnic Young Leaders New Zealand. I'm currently working as the D&I lead at Kainga Ora, as well as the chair and interim GM at Multi-Ethnic Young Leaders. Thank you.
Welcome. And then I think next on my screen is Donald. Tēnā koe, Donald.
Good everyone. I'm originally from Waihopai, and I'm coming to you at the moment from Otepoti, where I'm studying. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with a volunteer startup called Employment Advice New Zealand, and I also enjoy a few community governance positions and sort of grassroots volunteering, which is what I really enjoy. But it's an honour and pleasure to be speaking to everyone today.
Thank you. And tēnā koe, Dante. No mai, haere mai.
Hello, yes, I'm Dante. I'm a first year uni student. I'm studying at Victoria University. I'm originally from Otepoti, Dunedin, and my background is in climate activism and youth representation at city council levels.
Well, I think this is an inspiring panel lineup. So some things that I love, obviously Donald is community governance, grassroots. Michelle sounds like such strong leadership already. So, you know, sitting in these top seats. And Dante, thank you so much for being with us and connections across our region. So something we love. We've got a couple of questions and we've got a little bit of time. So our panel can kind of take your time and share some of the kind of things that you've seen that affects youth in the governance and volunteering space. And so we've got a little bit of time to kind of explore that. But my first part is for Donald, and it is, what is working and are we supportive of our youth in governance and in volunteering?
Thank you, Rose. I think there's a lot to be said about this area. I think we're seeing a lot of change, and I would definitely say it's positive change. There's a real improvement in how organizations are recognizing the value of having younger volunteers. I think we're often seeing that this can be quite a difficult area to tap into and to tap into well, especially, you know, as we have this COVID, you know, ongoing pandemic. Often remote volunteering can be rather difficult, and it can be something that young people think initially might be quite good, but doesn't necessarily always work out so well in terms of finding the time to do, you know, longer projects. In-person volunteering, I think, is still going relatively strong, and a lot of young people are enjoying it. I think the main reason that young people participate in these sorts of things is that they want to develop their skills and they want to make a difference in communities. And although those are two big reasons, obviously amongst others, they also want to feel valued and they want to feel a sense of belonging to the organization. And I think that makes it really crucial in terms of inducting young people into organizations. So almost like any induction, it's not really specific to young people, but I think it's especially vital with young people that they're not necessarily going to be still signing in as a visitor because nobody's done the right paperwork, even though they've, you know, been volunteering for a couple of months, or if it's a volunteering position that actually requires special skills or special training, provided that the young person or the volunteer has indicated a real desire to begin this training. I think it's really vital that that starts. You don't want somebody coming in time and time again hoping that they can start learning these new skills and really feel valued and, you know, feel that they're actually making a difference in their community, but they're still not able to start. And I think these are things that can be very easily overlooked, you know, because everybody in these organizations is always exceptionally busy, but then it is a real barrier to retaining youth, you know, once we've jumped all the, got over all these barriers of actually attracting youth to sign up in the first place. That's all I'll say on volunteering. Young board members, and we have a very liberal, wide definition when we talk about young board members. It's generally understood to be under 35-year-olds. I think it's really positive. We're seeing sort of leaps and bounds in this area. Organizations are really looking for a young board member, and I really applaud that, especially community organizations that are looking to support youth or benefit youth. It's just so helpful having a young person who can look at it from that perspective of either the people you're trying to help or the people you're trying to reach to make up some of your volunteering force. It just provides a better range of ideas, better ability to foresee some opportunities, better understanding of a different range of risks, perhaps. Just all of those standard reasons why almost, I would say everybody on this at this event would support, a diverse board. For that reason, we should also be looking to appoint young people. They may, I think, have to face perhaps the risk that not all young people have the same sort of acumen and when it comes to, strategy and governance. But this can also be overcome just by, providing young people the opportunities, the support, mentoring opportunities. And, Volunteering New Zealand is excellent at, and so is community governance actually, at providing free workshops and information resources for, people who are looking at these volunteer directorships or trusteeships or governance roles, just any governance role. So I think it's really important we continue to promote those towards young people, but we also provide a spot specifically for someone who's under 35 on boards. And as that happens more and more, we'll also see more young people with experience and people will be more willing to put confidence in people who are young to lead organizations, which will be a really excellent thing.
Yeah, well said, Donald. I think of some of the things that you kind of touch on is induction. So if we're asking our young people to come onto these boards and putting them in a position of governance and lots of responsibilities, we really need to look after them, because we don't want to just, here you go and off you go, and you're kind of like floundering, not sure what's kind of going on. So I think what you kind of alluded to is really good induction for youth, potentially someone that could help mentor that younger person for a couple of board meetings, that kind of thing. And looking after our youth. We have a lot of youth who want to come onto boards, and it is interesting, like some of our young people, they've set up social enterprise organisations, they've got businesses online, they've got a huge amount of skill set that our not-for-profits can really do with, so huge kind of value to us.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll be able to come back to a couple of things that you've touched on as well. So I'm going to move over to Michelle, and the parto for you, Michelle, is what are the barriers for youth wanting to get involved in governance roles?
Thank you. I guess for me, I'm going to come at multiple angles for this, because there's that overarching, I guess, barrier of just information, access to information and opportunities that are available, particularly when it comes to governance. And then I think with youth from certain, I guess, communities, from my own experience as an ethnic New Zealander, that's governance is not something that we really, it's a concept that I've not grown up being exposed to. I'd say volunteering very broadly is something that, you know, we speak about at home, or I can see, or I see my family members or friends being involved with, but governance, especially for a lot of like people such as myself, I guess, it is quite new. And I know that there are so many young people I've spoken to who, when I just bring up governance or community governance or the idea of joining a board, things like that, for them it's a very new topic. There's a lot of misconceptions, but also there's a lot of questions around where would I go, or how do I start? And because it's not something that, and also actually depending on what sort of governance you're looking at, it's almost, you know, whether or not you need to tailor a CV, specifically a governance CV, all of that, which are things that, you know, some people struggle even putting together professional CV, because it's, you know, you've got first generation professionals, and then you're going and asking or encouraging people to almost go into a completely new space that they've just simply not really had a lot of exposure to. And I think that that sort of ambiguity and that sort of, it just feels a bit, I guess, far-fetched for a lot of young people, especially young people from, I guess, underrepresented backgrounds in general. So yeah, I'd say a big one, however, is still that access to information. I think that there's a lot of, it's one of the things we're seeing, not just in governance, but I think in youth leadership as well, is that real need for greater transparency, that real need for leveling the playing field and reducing any sort of like, reducing practices such as shoulder tapping, such as, yeah, I guess that real, and giving people enough time to really be able to consider if they want to do something, to ask questions, to apply, because I know sometimes there are such short turnaround times that by the time you hear about something, it can almost be too late. So it's really, I think, around making it easy and accessible for as many people and to as many people as possible, and almost actively going to target and making that a priority to actively target communities or young people from communities that, you know, are missing currently, that have not traditionally been part of the pipeline that you're looking at, or part of the pool of young people that you would usually, you know, talk to or encourage to apply for roles. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there that resonate with me, and that's kind of in that cultural space. So what does governance look like if you're coming from that kind of cultural perspective? It might be very different to when you're sitting at a board table and there's minutes and agenda and very process driven. but also the barriers to youth. In particular, you might not see anyone that looks like you haven't heard any stories of youth that you can kind of say, oh, they're kind of doing that, or they're sitting on that board, and so you can see someone that's a bit similar. On our steering group, we actually have 2 youth members, one from our Te Ao Māori group and one from our steering group. And I think what we found very early on with our steering group member is if you kind of give that tag that they're a youth, then they feel if they're new to the space, they feel like they can only talk about youth topics. So it kind of isolates you into a space that isn't quite healthy, because you're not there just to talk about young people's stuff. You're there to provide your own lived experience and the things that you can bring to the table. So I think it's something that we've worked on, is to say, look, you are a younger person, but you're also there for lots of other different opportunities that you can bring about that diverse thinking, which is kind of what Donald has talked about as well.
Yeah, sorry, can I quickly, I guess, just tail on to your comment, and I just wanted to talk about what you shared around young people feeling as though the value that they contribute is merely the fact that, you know, I'm here to speak about this, and I would expand that to say that's not just young people. It's when you're someone who, whether you're a woman on a board or whether you're someone who's Māori, Pasifika, ethnic, a lot of those almost identities can sometimes, you know, depending on the culture of a board, it's one of those things that I think we're learning to develop and to really get better at in general, because it's absolutely one of those barriers where you almost where you're almost labelled as this, and therefore you add value only within the scope of, you know, this. And I think that that's something that can be disempowering. And you can lose a lot of potential future board leaders or board members and, you know, people when they almost feel that sort of, disempowerment.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to why are you asking a youth person to be on there? It's almost like observer role. People, you know, kind of for and against it, because it's a lot of time and effort. So you're asking someone to participate. So are you asking them to participate fully or not? We've kind of had a question about that, about a school student on a board. Were they able to be a full board member that's excluded from staff and finance matters? I think if that is a secondary skill and that is your skill, that's probably wise. But I would say on other kind of boards that with the youth, I don't think you would be excluding them. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was some great kōrero there. So to Dante, our pātai for you is, what are the other leadership opportunities for youth within the community and voluntary sector? And then also, is it a lonely place for our youth here?
Those are both really good questions, and actually they link into each other really well. So I think something that a lot of people don't think about, or it doesn't cross their mind, is youth-led initiatives. So we get a lot of talk about young people getting involved in like pre-existing organizations that are run by adults and already have all these structures set up. But I think we should also talk about organizations that have been like set up by the young people and led by the young people. And you'll often find this in like communities where like there's a specific cause that a bunch of them support, so they'll get together and like figure out a way to organize events, fundraise, like the School Strikes for Climate, for example, a really good example of this entirely youth-led way of having youth involved with community groups. And I think that's kind of, I wouldn't say undervalued exactly, just kind of, it doesn't get as much recognition as other ways of like having youth representatives. And because those organizations and young people who are already doing those things themselves can be a really good way to get youth like kind of consultants, I guess. I guess this also comes back to what we were talking about earlier with why do we like, we all agree that youth representation is good. I'm pretty sure a lot of us agree about that. But I think there isn't much clarity as to what exactly that youth representation involves. It's like, do you want a young person who is part of your organization to help you on how your organization should work? Or do you want a young person who is part of the group that your organization is trying to help so that you can help young people better? There's a lack of clarity for both the people recruiting the young person and the young person as to what's expected of them. And I think so that's kind of where a lot of some of the loneliness comes in, because it's hard enough being like the youngest person in the room and having to approach and learn all of like these complicated systems of like how just organizations work. But when it's done without clarity of what exactly you're there to provide, I think that makes it kind of isolating for young people. I know a lot of groups are working on this, and one solution and way to work through this is to have a group of young people instead of just one young person. And so there's less of that pressure to be representing all youth as one person, because it's a massive demographic, which you can't expect one person to accurately represent. And it also gives you that support and that ability to build a community around people who understand what it's like to be the youngest person in the room, to be like the least qualified person speaking, and things like that, which I think is a common feeling for young people in representation roles. And again, this ties back into like youth-led community groups, because if it's been like led entirely by youth with like very little to no like adult involvement, I think young people will undersell what they can do because they don't kind of have the context of working within a structure. They've done all this incredible work, but again, it's not within the context of like being acknowledged as part of that wider volunteering community as like more well-established volunteering organizations are. So yeah, I think the biggest thing here would be to clarify what you want from like a youth representative, and look at what young people are already doing by themselves.
I mean, I love what you're saying there, because it kind of brings up that induction and looking after that young person coming on. And some good processes, very simple, put in place, can make sure that they're up to speed and they're not kind of floundering. Equally, I really like what you're saying about the collective. If we've got lots of different not-for-profits in different sectors, so say we're in the environment or health sector or arts or sports or whatever kind of community volunteering group it is, there is an opportunity to reach out to other organisations and say, do you have a younger person on? Do you have a youth? Can we kind of bring a group together? We've also done this with Volunteering New Zealand, Philanthropy New Zealand, about trying to extend out and look after our younger people on our governance board. So I think that's a really wise way to look at it for youth, so that you can build up your networks and your kind of thinking, and you get the support, don't you, from younger people as well. And you can learn what is good and what might not be so good when you all have different perspectives on different types of governance and voluntary roles as well. Okay, it's been some great, thank you each for all of your responses to these questions. So now we're going to open up to all of you, so you can take your unmute and anyone's can chip in here. So we just want to kind of ask you all, like, what motivates youth, and is it mostly about social good and giving back? Is this what we can entice our youth in, is by, in the not-for-profit sector, we do so many fantastic things. It's very much about giving back, serving your community, that kind of thing. Is that a real driver for our youth? What do you all think? Shall I pick on someone?
I can start. I was waiting to see if anyone else will put their mics off. I do believe that that's an incredibly important element of why young people get involved, because I do think that I've been reflecting on what it is that actually inspires or makes or sort of fuels people to keep going in these spaces, and I do feel like there's that element of actually a lot of our, it can be quite rewarding, because it's what almost shapes our identity and who we also, or how we see ourselves and where we are positioned and how we are sort of in our sort of relations to everything that happens, or just, yeah, I guess it's that sort of element of contextualizing who we are in this world. And I do think that, sorry, that's going real meta. But I think that, you know, for me, reflecting on a lot of the sort of volunteering opportunities I've had, they've been really valuable for me because I feel like they've helped to shape who I am and who I want to be and where I want to go, and how I want to almost brand myself. And I think that that sort of social good element of, you know, especially around that community governance, a lot of that volunteer governance space is always going to be attractive insofar as, you know, the brand is one where you have young people who are like, I want this brand to be part of my journey, and I want to be part of this journey's brand. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is important. We get a lot of inquiries from younger people and doing all different sorts of kind of governance voluntary roles about what opportunities they might be able to find. You know, we're strong advocates, aren't we, for our voluntary sector? So you can learn a huge amount of skills. You can learn from others around you, from experience, and it's a great way to build up your kind of career skill set. And you often, if you're starting out and you don't have any governance experience, you might have done something at school, that you might have been part of a group, you might have formed some kind of collective. I think you just have to think outside the square of like what you can offer to that board as well, if you're interested in securing a board role. So Donald or Dante, would you like to share any insights, what you think about the motivation and what you might be seeing?
What I would possibly add to what Michelle said before is that I think there's a big underlying desire for young people to do some good, create some change, improvement in their communities. But there's also a range of other things there as well. You know, just like any population, you know, we're picking perhaps a third of everyone and trying to generalize. It's quite difficult. I think, you know, at the most basic level, people want to improve their communities. And for young people, they also want to, some of them, develop skills to help them help communities in the future. And I think, you know, to touch on that question that was asked before in the Q&A, you know, it can be difficult to learn those skills if you're going to be put in a board position, but perhaps minus the vote, and you'll be, you know, asked to leave for public excluded masses. You know, and I would question at that point, what are you actually wanting from your young person who's on that board? Do you actually want a young perspective, or, you know, and what's the reason why you can't have them attend public excluded masses? You know, financial and staffing issues are obviously sensitive, but you should have a high level of trust in all of your board members. It's a position that must be respected. They often carry legal obligations regardless. There's a statutory floor on how old you can be. If you're not going to trust somebody, you know, to, I suppose, sit through those masses and then not disseminate it later, then you possibly shouldn't have them as a board member to begin with, really. And so I would say, you know, those young people are likely to be trusted, and that's why they were that one young person who was selected. And that's a really important thing, that we sort of open the doors and don't and don't sort of, you know, withhold too much, because we would be really withholding the opportunities to develop skills. And just like any board member, they're only there to provide information that they can. They won't, you know, want to talk about things that they don't have any idea about, but they will learn from other people's expertise in the process. So I think really the underlying things are probably the desire to learn and really to help people and help their communities, which is what I say it all boils down to.
I think that's really well said, and maybe that's a different perspective, that rather than asking to have the youth on the school board, they have that collective panel of youth, and when they kind of need them, there's a place to go for that. Because yeah, it is about what are you asking of them, and then being kind of excluding. So Dante, what do you think about, is this really about social good? Are we just wanting to tick a box for youth and say we're doing something great, or is there a stronger motivation here from our young people?
I don't know, I think, well, there are a couple of questions here. I think on the issue of like youth on like boards and like how much they should be like, how much responsibility they should have. I think it's also to keep in mind that as a young person, they are going to be a young person, which sounds obvious, but I feel like it often gets kind of ignored, and like the expectation is that the young person will be able to keep up with all the adults, and there are definitely a lot of young people who are capable of it. However, a lot of pressure gets put on them to keep up at these levels, and at that point, are you really asking for a young person, or do you just want someone to tick a box? Because you're not going to get like the young person's perspective by someone who spends all of their free time desperately trying to understand how board meetings work. That's just, it kind of defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do. So I think, yeah, there needs to be a balance here about whether like giving young people the responsibility and the voice that they deserve, while also understanding that we are still young people, and we're not going to have like an immediate grasp on board procedures or like legal implications of things like that, and expecting us to kind of takes away from having that youth element to it. And in terms of like motivation, I agree with what everyone said so far, but also like to add on that from an environmental activism and volunteering perspective, a lot of young people feel like this distinct despair and hopelessness about the climate crisis, which is a feeling I know a lot of adults share as well. Everyone's dealing with this, but I think for young people it's particularly intense because there's kind of no young people at the decision-making chair watching the decisions being made that determine our future. And so, at least for me and for a lot of the young people I've worked with, volunteering has been about having a sense of control and hope, of having that control of like, oh, if I'm contributing to this, then my future isn't entirely out of my hands. If it's anything from like organizing a nationwide school strike to demand environmental policy change, to just planting some native trees, all of these things add up to a sense of control, being like, I can actually change my future, and that leads to hope. And that's a really important aspect for young people, I think. And so, yeah, that's just what I've noticed, what hadn't been touched on so far, is how volunteering can be a part of how young people hope for a better future. And I'm sure this applies to not just environmental issues, but also issues such as like homelessness and poverty, and being able to volunteer in those spaces, being like providing free meals and helping at homeless shelters, gives people back that sense of control over their future and the world that they live in.
Yeah, that's well said. That's that kind of activism, isn't it? So that you can really actively be doing something that looks tangible and real, then you can do that in different forms of volunteering. So what have any of you come across some kind of issues with adults thinking that you're not capable? So moving into like that difficult thing, like what advice should we be giving if someone's just kind of thinking, why are you here, or what's your value, or what's some key tips that we might be able to provide someone that might a young person that could come across that?
Well, I might start off. I'm sure most of us will have something to say about this actually. So my first governance experience was on a school board, and that's that's a situation that quite a young person can be in, and that's the same responsibility as any other board member. The principal has the same responsibility at a governance level as someone who's potentially as young as 14. Now I was I think 18 at the time, and quite early on I was told by another board member who had been a student representative before being a parent representative, just to forget the age thing. And I think from my perspective, and my view here might differ from some of the other panelists, is that if you're going to be on a board, you need to take responsibility, because I mean, the law puts responsibility on you. You have responsibility to the stakeholders of the organization itself. And you carry that same responsibility as everybody else. And you need to be able to leave each meeting with a good conscience that you actually provided input, because you're actually ultimately responsible as everybody else. And that's why I sort of advocate for not watering down the youth perspective or position by removing them from public excluded sections or specific parts of meetings, because at the end of the day, we want the youth perspective, and that's why the young person is there. So we shouldn't sort of be building up these walls, and that's again just discouraging people from feeling like their position is valued and valid. And so when we build those sort of things in there, we really reduce the ability of that young person to provide what they think. And the other thing I would add is, I think it's the responsibility of a chairperson at the end of the day to make sure that every board member is heard, respected, and understood at any governance sort of meeting or whatnot. It's the responsibility of the chair to make sure that that young person is being respected by the other board members, and that they get an opportunity to speak if they wish to. Yeah, that's probably all I have to say about that.
Those were great points. So whoever's sitting at the board table, it's your responsibility. Each of you hold a responsibility legally. So regardless if you're the young person put there, you have that right to get up and say, no, I'm making a decision because of this. And so that should be valued, shouldn't it? Michelle, did you have any comments with this around just some difficulties that young people might experience working in this space?
No, I saw you turn your camera on as well, Michelle, so that's why I was just like,
Michelle can answer.
yeah, no, I just wanted to, I guess more, in a response to Donald, what Donald has shared earlier around, that being valued and being able to partake in the process or in the board meeting or in governance fully as a young person. And for that, I'd like to just note that it's really important for us all, I guess, moving forward to also just reflect on the way that the constitutions of different organisations or the rules or the governance rules have been set up and written, and whether or not, non-inclusive practices and barriers to participation have actually been written in to the systems and processes of an organisation, whether that be around, voting rights, whether that be around if there are constitutions that state when board meetings take place, and if they take place, one of my good friends has actually was speaking to me about how, they're a young person on a quite an established board, and all the board meetings take place in the middle of the day when they're at work. But most of the people who are on the board are either at a senior level in an organisation where they have far more flexibility with their time and day, or they might be, slightly older, and then they have more flexibility in general. And for a lot of younger people, that flexibility is simply not there. When you're, whether you're a student and then it's, you've got exams and also other classes that become very hard for you to manage. And also when you're a young person in the start of your career, where it's where the power dynamics are not in your favor, and you find it very difficult to be like, hey, excuse me, can I please take some time off to hop on this call, or things like that. So in terms of, I guess just reflecting on and having a good sort of, and deep sort of examination as to whether there are any sort of biases or non-inclusive sort of practices and barriers that have actually been written almost into the way the governance system operates within for a specific organisation, and then I guess taking steps to, reduce those barriers that are there.
Those are all really good points. We've got about 5 minutes till we will be handing over, but and we're just going to talk a little bit about youth and governance and what can we do to help our youth and governance, their community roles, support and mentoring, that kind of thing. So I'll ask you if you've got some kind of things that you've come across that you think have worked, so we can share those. spotlight those. Community governance, we run a governance mentoring program nationwide, and we do one for our chairs as well. We are going to do a rangatahi one about mentoring and adapt it so that our youth aren't kind of stuck on a long-term program, but it's very kind of interactive, and it can take you through practical things about how a board meeting works. With one mentor with a group of like 3, so each of them will have someone that they can kind of work with. And so you need the kind of practical practice skills of how board meetings run alongside the peers. So some of the things that I've taken away from our discussion today has been around the inductions, really important, because we can't ask our young people to come on if we're not kind of set up to look after them. And then when we do ask them to come on, we need to look after them. I think some other things that I've been hearing is widen out the collective kind of voice of youth. So maybe connect your youth in with other organisations that have youth representation. Equally, don't just ask a young person to be there for, don't ask it, you should turn your phone off when you're doing this kind of webinars. Don't ask your young people to be there in our tokenistic roles. If you're asking for a youth to be there and sit there, think about the responsibility is theirs equally with everyone else. And just some of the other things is about the giving back to the community, and that there's such a passion and a need that our youth want to be there for our communities. So is there anything, just as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything else that you would think we could support through mentoring? Do you find mentoring works? Would it be good if you're mentored with your chair or someone on the board? Or have you got some other kind of things that you think you would love to have in your own experience and that we could do better, or we could offer?
Just something really quickly to add on to Donald's point about being a fully fledged board member with legal responsibility, that if you're going to have a young person do that, you need to educate them as to what their legal responsibility is, because it's a bit ridiculous to expect like an 18 or 19-year-old to have the same understanding of the legal ins and out as someone who's been sitting on boards for like 30 years. So that's a really big thing, and because it can get the young person in a lot of trouble if they just haven't had like the support to understand what their responsibility is.
Yeah, I really loved how you touched on that, isn't it? Is that expectations. So it's really critical to decision making, and to look after youth. We shouldn't just think that how are our expectations of youth? We're not expecting them to have 30 years, like you said, Dante. It's a really good point. Who would like to give some other words of wisdom before we wrap up? Donald?
I'll just add to it, add to what Dante said, in that, you know, we can actually expect high level things from our youth at a governance level, but we just need to support them, you know, after meetings, before meetings, as Dante said, understanding their responsibilities, you know, making sure they know that their voice is going to be heard and respected. And I think that's really where mentoring comes in. It's really good to have a chairperson or an experienced board member who can mentor somebody, and it doesn't necessarily need to be on the same board that young person sits. Just someone who's experienced in governance, who they can come to when there's a sticky situation, or where they've got an opinion that might be different from the rest of the board, and they want some advice about how they should best go about articulating that, for example. I think those sorts of relationships are really helpful for a young person, and they actually help sort of extract the actual perspective, which gets to the core of why you've put a young person on the board in the first place. So yeah, for me, it's really, I don't like to see suggestions that we invite somebody onto the board for some of the time, or we water down their role, because you can't really tell somebody that we value your voice and then say, oh, you've got to leave because we're going to talk about finances. I think that's relatively difficult to reconcile, and we can just solve that issue with proper mentoring. So yeah, I think the work that community governance is doing at the moment is actually really, really well done, and really excellent to be applauded.
Well, we'll take that pat on the back, Donald, so thank you. And we're more than, would love to have each of you with us and share insights, because I think we do a board talk series and I'd really love to do a youth one. So Michelle, have you got some things you might want to share just as we wrap up?
See if I've got anything. You know what? I'm just going to talk what everyone else has shared and leave it at that. I think that mentoring is incredibly valuable. I think that there needs to be far more work done in terms of demystifying what the idea of governance or just what it is for young people. It can be incredibly intimidating, even for a lot of young people who are incredibly capable, who've done such incredible stuff. I sometimes have conversations and then I bring up, have you considered, governance or trying to, go down this path? And then immediately it's almost like, oh no, I don't know, that sounds a bit, it's a bit intimidating. And these are people who, are very confident in their day jobs. So I'd say that there really needs to be that real bridge, I guess, for a lot of young people who, might have started from youth leadership and just being able to sort of serve in other, whether it's like you sort of shared, whether it's at school or things like that, or participating in these different sort of, I guess, more youth leadership style events, and then actually what it's like to actually step into governance within, let's say, an established organization with a constitution, with all these sort of different rules. And I think that bridge is not necessarily made. It's not quite visible or clear. And actually that's something that we are looking to really help to address, because there is a lot of demand that I've personally sort of heard over the past few days.
Yeah, and I think I'm hearing from you, Michelle, that we could do a lot better to share the story and value of why young people should be with us in our governance and volunteering. So we need to do a better job of kind of sharing out the value of why governance is for community. So wonderful. Dante, I'm just going to ask you quickly, I'm going to hand over shortly, but would you like to share anything just as we finish up? And I just want to thank you all to the panel.
No, I'm going to agree with support for what everyone else has said. It's always good to hear what other young people think.
It is, and we've had some really great feedback coming through on the chat. So I just want to thank you all for your time. Thank you, Michelle. She does a wonderful job. And I'm going to hand it over to Sue Kovar, so Volunteering New Zealand Board Chair. She might put her hand up, I think, to maybe mentor someone. So that would be good. We can put her on the spot. No mai, haere mai. So I'll bring it back to Michelle. Ka kite.